Thank you. Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. This meeting has been live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Can remind members to follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off their video when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function and you'll be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with the business effectively as possible. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be taken by roll call. If any member asks to leave the meeting for any reason, can remind you to either write leave in the chats function for the period of time, or you could write and then join. That will allow members, officers to monitor members' presence. I'll maybe try that again. If a member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or you could write leave the Teams chat function and then join. This will allow us to monitor members' presence. Tracy, can you confirm the said and apologies, please? And I agree to the remote participation of members.
Morning, Chair, morning members. We've currently got 15 members present. I don't have any formal apologies, but not present at the start of the meeting are Councillor Ian Crothers, Councillor Fairbairn, Councillor Giusti, Councillor Sloan and Councillor Tate, and I had a notification from Councillor McClelland that he would be joining the meeting later. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Do we have declarations of interest, please? Gail, please. Gail McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. No declaration of interest, but in respect of items 4 and 5, I was contacted by an objector who lives in the vicinity of the applications. However, I just gave planning advice as to where they needed to go for planning advice. I don't believe I've prejudiced myself, and I'll stay in for the items being heard.
Thank you, Gail. My apologies, I didn't even switch my own phone off. Councillor McKay.
Aye, Chair, it's the first two applications. On reading them, I'm quite concerned that they've a number of conditions that they had on previous applications that they've not implemented yet. Could we defer these two applications until such times as they've adhered to the conditions of previous applications?
We could, but that's for each application in its turn when we get to them, Councillor McKee. Thanks for bringing that up, but that will be for each individual application when we get to that stage. This is for declarations of interest that you have in relation to any particular planning application. But I've got that. I've got Tracy Sonko coming in, but I maybe let Archie Driver in first, and then Tracy can deal with any questions members might have, and then whatever her own particular issue is. Archie?
Thanks, Chair. Similar to Councillor McGregor. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Similar to Councillor McGregor, items 4 and 5 have been approached by objectors, gave them advice as where to go for information, so therefore I'll be staying within the Planning Applications Committee.
Much appreciated. Then, Tracy, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, Chair, it was just to say that Henry McClelland had passed on a declaration of interest to myself prior to the meeting that he would be declaring an interest in items 4 and 5.
Oh, okay.
Due to his business associations with the applicant and will not take part in those two items, but he was late and he'll join the meeting after that.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. I've got an application for an application. I've got a notification from one member who is late. He has now joined us.
Ivor's got his hand up, Chair.
Ivor, can you see it? Tracy, you've still got yours up. Ivor?
Chair, just to say that I stay in Summer Park Road, which is just along the road from item 6, but I think I'm remote enough from the development that I don't need to leave the meeting.
Great, thank you. That seems to conclude declarations of interest. So we will, go, it's Doug Fairbairn that was apologising for being late, so Doug's now with us. So we're going to agenda item number 3, which is the minute of the previous meeting of 20th of May 2021. If this is a true record, members, we will endorse it. If no, please let me know if there are any issues with it. I don't see any notice. So in that case, this is a true record, and we move on to agenda items 4, 5, 6 and 7. So agenda item 4, it's an application for an extension to stable building at Cherrybank Stables, Waterbeck, Lockerbie. It's a full application. The recommendation is to approve conditionally. Case officer is Carla Livingston and the reference number is 21/0140/full. Carla, if you're with us, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Chair, I've got my hand up.
Oh, Councillor McKee.
It's this application 4 and application 5. There's issues been raised in these applications where they have not adhered to previous conditions on previous planning applications. On that basis, should we hold these 2 applications back until such times as they've applied the conditions previously given to them for other applications?
Before that, Councillor McKee, if you'll forgive me, I forgot to ask the clerk to outline procedure for today. So my apologies, members. Tracy, can you come in and outline the procedure for today, please? And then I'll come back to Councillor McKee when we're back to agenda item 4.
Thanks, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and then applicants or their agents. In line with the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020, Schedule 6, Part 4, covering the exclusion of the public from meetings of local authorities, representatives were offered the option of joining the meeting remotely to deliver their presentation or to provide written statements to be read out on their behalf. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members from the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine that application. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Tracy, and apologies for that. Now, the procedure is, I've got Councillor Campbell wanting to speak, but the procedure is that we have the case officer do a presentation with questions for the case officer. We'll listen to the applicant and objector, and then we'll get to session. At that stage, Councillor McKee's question should be set, although I do have a reply from Mr Sutty which says the short answer is no. These applications have to be considered on their own merits, and previous breaches of conditions are a separate matter. However, it is open to members to seek assurance about future compliance from the agent. The agent is Mr McCall, and I'm sure he will be listening to this discussion and he will be given the opportunity to reassure members if that is the case. So I've got Councillor Campbell, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was really just to go through the clerk's notes, but Tracy was on the ball. Thank you.
Well done, thank you. Maybe it's good news for folk that my screen is frozen, so but I've still got audio, so that's fine. So, Carla, can you now take us through your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Oh, I can't see. Should the presentation be on the team screen? I can't.
It is now.
Oh, that's
now,
it.
yeah.
Right now. Okay, thank you. Thank you. If you could go to the next slide, please. Sorry. Okay, the first slide shows the application site with an I indicate where the position of the application site and the existing access to the site of the B722. The application site is directly adjacent to existing stable buildings, and it would extend from an existing stable building. If you could move on to the next slide, please. The proposed block plan shows the position of the extension. There's a dashed rectangle, and that shows the position of an existing timber stable that would be removed as part of the proposal. You can see the ridge line indicated on the block plan, which shows that the proposed extension and the existing stable building would read as a single larger rectangular building with a double pitch and a valley gutter. Next slide, please. This shows the existing elevation and floor plans. You can see on the existing floor plan on the right hand side, you can see the position of the timber stables that would be removed as part of the proposal, and the rectangle on the left indicates the existing stable that would remain. Next slide, please. Here you can show where you can see where the stable would be extended to both the front and to the northern elevation where the existing timber stables would be removed. The proposed extension would read as as it would effectively double the existing modern stable that's on the site. Next slide, please. This partial elevation was submitted during the assessment process, and it shows that on the south elevation, the original floor plan indicated that it would be a block wall, but on the south elevation, there was an actual error in the plans, and this shows on the south elevation that it would be open, largely open, and with a stable wall indicated where the horses would be kept in. Next slide, please. This shows the existing access of the B722. There's an existing unmade road that runs from the access adjacent to an existing carpet gallop that serves the site. Next slide, please. This shows the main stable building. It was quite a sunny day, and it's kind of, the photo's a bit dark. I'm sorry. You can see it in the foreground. There's a small ridge. That's the part of the existing timber stable that would be removed. Next slide, please. This shows the smaller existing timber stable that would be removed. The proposed extension would run roughly to where the projecting section on that timber stable. Next slide, please. This is looking back towards Kirkfield, which fronts onto the main road. There's an existing training area between the application site and the neighbouring dwelling houses, the closest neighbouring dwelling houses, and these houses, Kirkfield and Cherrybank, front onto the main road. Next slide, please. This is looking east towards from the application site over the open paddocks there. Next slide, please. This is again looking over the existing the existing yard area. The proposed stable would come out roughly not quite where that line is, that drainage line is running along the centre of the yard. Next slide, please. This is looking back towards in a northern direction, looking towards you can see part of the existing stable that would be removed, which is the darker stable with the tin roof. And you can see the existing main stable, which is taller than the timber stable. Next slide, please. That's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Members, any questions for the case officer? It doesn't appear so. So we'll go to Councillor Dryburgh, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm just in the report, Carla, there's a bit of a planning history here. And I'm just wondering how many of the planning histories were actually retrospective.
I think several of them were over the course of the years. I mean, I didn't deal with any of these, a lot of the applications that are in the history. The site has an extensive history, but I think several of them were retrospective.
Yeah, normally that would be written in the report as there was a retrospective plan application. I'm sure I'm right in that, Chair. I think that's the case, but several's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Archie. We'll make sure that if there are situations like that to be reported, that they will feature in the officer's report to members. Okay, if we have no other members looking to speak, we have Dr. John Donnelly, who's an objector, and he has submitted a statement to be read out. Tracy will read out the statement, and as usual, we won't ask questions on the statement because it's simply a representation by an objector. Tracy, when you're ready, please, and it's the same 3 minutes, but you can monitor yourself, Tracy, I'm sure.
I'll Chair. It is quite a long one, so I'm not sure if I'll get through it all, but I'll try my best.
Thank you.
Application 21/04140 full was first issued to neighbours for comment on the 16th of February 2021, with comments to be completed by 9th of March. A new application was then placed on the D&G planning website on 8th of March, but this was not communicated to neighbours and was significantly different to the original. The Planning Office decided that this new version should be reissued for comment on the 23rd of March. The new version of 21/0140 full 23rd of March will enable expansion of the current stables block by the construction of 2 new annexes, so 3 in total. Each annex will have 5 stables, 15 in total, and will be under a 6.2 metre roof. The current wooden stables on the north side will be removed and the new structure will be expanded over that area to form one of the annexes. Each of the annexes will be isolated from the other 2 and each will have its own access egress doorway. The overall shape of the new structure will be rectangular, 26 metres by 18 metres roughly, so a significant increase in the footprint. If you were designing and building a stable from scratch, you wouldn't build a 6.2 metre tall stable in a congested area. Instead of building more overbearing buildings, you could build a lower structure, save some money, ease roof maintenance and minimise working at height. I also think that it would be wise to build the stable units with some segregation between units. This would limit any fire impact. The drawings of the original stables is referenced as 531-1. The drawing for the first version of the new application is 531-2, which makes sense, but the drawings for the 8th of March updated is also 531-2, which doesn't make sense. Why do they have the same reference number? They were both drawn in December 2020. I'll come back to this later. I'm especially concerned about the safety of the horses, and I've tried to ascertain what the current Scottish legislation regarding evacuation routes for stables actually is. I phoned the fire department in Dumfries and I was informed that the building standards department was responsible, so presumably the planning committee knows. Each of the stable blocks has only one building exit which might be blocked by fire, but there is no alternative way out. I also note that the wooden stables facing our back door have a single doorway and therefore it is relatively easy to free the horse. In the new scheme, the horses are hemmed in and have 2 consecutive doorways to negotiate before they are free, stable door and the building exit. So the overall risk is actually being increased for the horse and any rescuer. How long would it take a fire engine to get to a stable from the road? They should have been one of the critical factors in choosing the location of the stables. Just because you have a spare building available doesn't make it the right option. Another point is, have the horse owners or insurance companies been told about the new stables and do they understand the risk? There are plenty of things to burn in the stable: straw, hay, wood, jackets, shawls, and plenty of things to initiate the fire, sparks from metal to metal contact and cigarettes, etc. Chair, that's me at 3 minutes and there's still quite a bit to go, actually.
Well, we can't allow that to continue. Tracy, can you maybe summarise briefly what the other issues are, and then we'll draw that to a conclusion, please.
There's a conclusion here, so I'll summarise on that one. Therefore, I'm objecting to the application on the following grounds. 1, the proposed stables are badly designed and completely oversized for a small farm. The net gain is only 5 stables. Is it really worth the time and money consumed? 2, the whole application is improvised to allow the use of an empty barn without consideration for potential hazards or the safety of the horses. There is also concern for no concern for neighbours or design. 3, the application should have actually presented the stables with evacuation routes and easy access for firefighters. Anything else is unacceptable. And 4, the fact that the plan reference numbers were duplicated and the timing for the introducing of a new application are very worrying and needs to be investigated. I missed the switch on the 8th of March, but a neighbour enlightened me and then I looked at the dates. I think the planning committee should take this very seriously.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm sure the planning committee members will indeed take that representation seriously. Okay, we now come to Mr. McCall, the agent on behalf of Richard Little Architectural Services. Mr. McCall, are you with us at all?
Yes, I am, yes.
Good stuff. Well, I'm sure you know the procedure well, Mr. McCall. You'll have 3 minutes to complete your presentation. I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And if you'd be kind enough to remain in case members have questions for you, I'd be grateful. And just whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. Well, thank you and good morning. The applicant and I are happy with the committee report, and I look forward to the recommendation being supported to enable further investment to be made in this local and successful business. I mean, there's not more I want to say at the moment because, as I say, the report is very satisfactory as far as we're concerned, and I understand from the Tracy that there's a statement in from an objector, but I think most of these points have been dealt with satisfactorily in the committee report.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. McCall. There was one question raised by Councillor McKee, and it has given some members concern, and that's the fact that the road conditions don't seem to, or the conditions placed on previous approvals have not been currently complied with. And Councillor McKee is hoping that members might refuse this objection or object to this proposal until the conditions that have been put in place have been implemented. Anything you might want to say about that, or can you not do so without referring back to the applicant?
No, I'm happy to make a comment on that. I think Councillor McKee is maybe referring in particular to the access onto the B722. That access was formed having received planning consent, but there are 1 or 2 issues regarding it. None of them are serious because one of them is simply to form a drain so that water doesn't run onto the public road, and to reduce part of a hedge to get the sightline, which the Roads Department have said within their report that they're perfectly happy with. These are the only issues that I'm aware of that need to be attended to, and there will be, once the approvals have been granted, we would then deal with these outstanding matters within a specific time, if that was the committee's preference.
And would you be content if the committee placed a period of time on the required completion of all these conditions, or are you happy to volunteer a time?
I'm happy for the committee to put a time on it, provided it's reasonable, and I would suggest that maybe 3 months might be a reasonable period.
Very kind of you. Thanks for that, Mr. McCall. Members, any questions for the agent? Councillor Dryborough?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. McCall. And I think that would, 3 months that you have suggested is an appropriate time. But I do, obviously, the objector has some concerns about security of horses, fire and things like that. And I understand what you're saying about the representations from the officers to support the recommendation of the application. However, there are obviously some concerns about the closeness to some of these particular neighbouring properties. So I'm just wondering if you can supply any sort of confirmation that fire and rescue or planning standards have come back and suggested any amendments to your previous plans.
Well, the position always is that the British Horse Authority are the controlling body as far as the racing stables are concerned, and they've got wide experience of what is required. There have been inspections at the yard on a couple of occasions, and the Horse Authority are satisfied that all the buildings and the operation comply entirely with their requirements. And there is nothing that we feel that we've got to do beyond that, but the owner is conscious that his license depends strictly on him adhering to the regulations that the BHA provide, and he's very conscious of that and takes cognizance of every item that they raise. But their previous inspection, they confirmed that they were more than happy with the condition and the operation of the stable, and that all the buildings complied with their requirements.
Can I come back to you?
Certainly, Archie.
Thank you very much. You'll have heard my comment earlier on about the amount of retrospective planning applications, and I'm quite concerned about the several, as the officer has actually said. So I would be concerned if any future application came in and work had already started with regards to planning. So I'm sure that's not your issue, that's your client's issue. I'm just wondering if there's any discussion between yourself and the client that this will not happen again.
It's never satisfactory for somebody to carry out work without planning consent, and I'm conscious of that and have been for some time, and discourage people to be doing that. My client is aware that there have been breaches in the past, and he has been informed that these issues must now be resolved, and approval of this particular application will take care of one of the issues that have not been dealt with previously. So yes, to answer your question, he will be advised not to do anything without any planning consent being granted. And he is a responsible guy, so I don't envisage any problems with that.
Thanks, Archie. And I'm sure I would hope that I trust your client will be listening, and it might be that any future retrospective applications might not be particularly well looked upon when he understands what the feeling of the committee is, and I'm sure you don't need to answer that, Mr. McCall. It's just an observation. I've got Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Drysdale.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Chair. Mr. McCall, just can you just absolutely clarify for me, because if I picked you up correctly, the licence to operate as a racing stable is reliant on BHA approval and supervision. So the welfare of the animals is the responsibility, amongst other things, because clearly there's a common law duty as well. But to operate, they has to meet the very stringent standards that are set out by the British Horse Racing Association. Am I right in that?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And can we just be clear, members, we're not discussing the British Horse Association, we're discussing a plan application and the merits of the application. And I understand that we have concerns about animal welfare, etc., but this is a planning application, and we should really confine our comments maybe to that particular element. Councillor Drysdale, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Mr. McCall, thanks for your input into the meeting today. Could I just ask a quick question with regards to the plans? And I don't know whether I've missed this or not. Have yourself and the applicant and the relevant bodies considered the excess waste with regards to the extra 4 or 5 stables that are being built? What do you actually do on site, or what does the applicant do? Does the waste get removed, or is there a special space, or do you use tractors? Obviously, I'm aware, having come from that kind of background, that there is a lot of waste produced and it can attract rats and vermin for residents nearby. So I would just like your assurances that this has all been covered, and I'm sure it has. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. Did you get the question, Mr. McCall?
Oh, sorry, yes, I did do, yes. Well, the waste is, there is waste there, and it's normally, you know, carrying out a mucking out process, and there is recycling involved as far as the waste materials is concerned. And again, there's total compliance with the requirements that are placed on the stables.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. McCall. If there are no other questions, I will thank Mr. McCall for his attendance today. Thank you very much, Mr. McCall.
Thank you.
Members, we're now in session, and before we go into discussion, Mr. Sutty would like just to provide us with clarification about conditions and time limits. So, David, if you want to come in first, please.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Just a quick clarification on what was discussed there. The current applicant, as you'll notice on page 22 of your agendas, is Mr. Dara Bork. I'm in the process of checking, so I can't be 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain he was not the applicant for the 2018 application, which had the access involved in it. So you'll notice that you've got conditions 2 to 6 being recommended, all of which are fully suspensive conditions, and they're related to this specific application. And by fully suspensive, what I mean is, it says that the development should not be brought into use unless and until all these requirements have been implemented. So you don't need to worry about a 3-month time period or anything like that. This application would cover those, and it can't be brought into use unless and until all those works have been done. So hope that clarifies that issue.
Thanks, David. That's really helpful. It's also helpful that Mr. McCall chose to volunteer a very short time period to conclude that work. So I'm sure collectively that will be done. I've got Councillor Hislop and then Councillor McKee.
Thank you, Chair. That was my understanding, and thanks, Mr. Sutty, for the clarification that these conditions were suspensive. I would just move the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 5.
Thank you, Councillor Hislop. Councillor McKee.
Will we be inspecting the site prior to it coming into operation to ensure that all these conditions have been complied with?
I expect we'll get notification, but I'll ask Mr. Sutty to confirm that. I'm expecting that we will be notified when all these conditions have been met, and we'll then just check to see that that is indeed the case. Mr. Sutty or Carla, can one of you come back, please? And probably Carla, can you come back and tell us what the process is?
I can jump in before Carla. Basically, there is an obligation with all planning permissions for developers now to notify the planning authority in writing of when they're commencing works, when they've completed works. So I'm assuming that Mr. McCall will be well aware of that and will therefore provide us with notification when it has been completed, and therefore we can double check if that's the case.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. You saved you any bother, Carla. Councillor Maitland, Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the usual question I have. I can't see any discussion about lighting in the conditions, but maybe the officer could help us with this. I mean, I can imagine that in a very large building like this, if you suddenly different lighting, it might be an annoyance to neighbours. It would be helpful to know what is planned.
Carla, can you come in and help Councillor Maitland, please?
Pardon me, sorry. The lighting, that wasn't something. The lighting, I assume, would continue as existing, and it was, and a lighting plan, Mr. McCall could correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't included as part of the proposal. I understand it's a larger building than an average stable. That being said, because I would imagine the stables are lit as existing, I didn't consider the extension to give rise to a material increase in lighting over what's existing at the moment.
Well, Mr. McCall, can you come back now, because he has concluded his presentation. Unfortunately, it's a question that might have been able to help us with, but if Councillor Maitland's concerned, she can request the members to add a condition to control and manage lighting as part of the approval today, and I'm quite sure Mr. McCall will be happy to accept any condition on lighting that's reasonable and fair. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, for letting me in. Just a second, Councillor Hislop's proposal, but obviously we'll let the rest of the deliberations continue, but I'm happy to second Councillor Hislop's recommendation.
Okay, so, I've got Stephen Thompson in, but before that, you and Councillor Hislop might want to consider whether or no you'd be happy to add a condition on lighting to the approval. I'll come back and ask you that at the end of the discussion. It'll just give you time to reflect on that. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just on a similar point, because I was kind of looking back over the previous change of use application to make this commercial, and I think within that there was a sort of time periods where it was open for the public, so it wouldn't be out with 9 to 8 on Mondays, 9 to 8 p.m. on Mondays to Fridays, and 9 to 5 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. So I'm thinking that obviously there will be a light impact that could be managed, but it's not clear in this application how that would be done. So I'd be happy to support some clarity on that if that could be conditioned. Thank you.
Okay, mind we can add conditions that are not reasonable, and I don't know about transportation of horses, whether they be racing horses or domestic ones. You wouldn't want them not getting into their site after a particular time period. That wouldn't be helpful, but Carla will maybe be able to help us again. Carla, can you come back in and give some clarity to the question that Councillor Thompson has posed, please?
Is that in relation to the operational hours of the stable as a whole, or lighting within? Sorry.
Yeah, so it's just, I wouldn't want to prevent the sort of fair transportation of animals in any way. I think it was more about the lighting arrangements generally, given the sort of the opening hours that were agreed as part of the change of use. So if it ties on to Councillor Maitland's point about just sort of having that clarity about how lighting would be managed, then that's fine, if that makes sense.
Helpful that, Stephen. Yeah, so it's all about using lights during the hours of darkness, when maybe not routinely, but as and when required. And Councillor Maitland might be concerned about intrusion of lighting into additional properties or areas. I don't think this area is part of the Dark Skies project, but we have a policy now that tries to control the spillage, for want of a better language, or lighting beyond the operational area. So I've got Councillor Ian Carruthers wanting to come in. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just, is lighting part of the application?
No, but we can consider that as an addition if we feel it's appropriate.
Chair, if it assists, I'm actually looking at the permission that was granted by the Planning Applications Committee for the change of use of agricultural buildings to equestrian use, change of use of agricultural landforms, sand gallop, installation of mechanical horse walker, erection of stable block, and erection of extension to existing building, access onto the A77, blah, 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 retrospective. Now, that was before yourselves back in 2018, and there was no hours of operation condition attached to that, and there was no condition attached regarding external lighting. So echoing really what Carla was saying, it probably is unreasonable to go and, given that the parent permission for the overall development doesn't actually have any such conditions, to attach it just for an extension to the existing buildings is probably coming into the realms of being unreasonable, I would suggest.
Okay, Doc, thanks for that advice. David, I've got Archie Driver again, then we'll try and bring this to a conclusion and move on. We'll have a proposal and a seconder to approve the application as it stands. Councillor Driver.
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, whilst David mentioned there about unreasonable putting a lighting condition into that particular thing, if of course we have visits from standards officers and things like that, and they find that the lighting is inappropriate, then of course they can go their normal sort of process and ask for another application to come forward. Just thinking, but I mean, I don't have any planning reasons for not for objecting to this particular application. However, I just want to made aware that I will be watching this particular area because of the amount of retrospective planning applications that have come in the past.
Thanks for that, Councillor Driver. So, given the discussion we've had, it would appear that members are looking to approve this application as it stands. Councillor Maitland, if you have an alternative view, I'll be happy to take that. If not, we'll take it as unanimous that this has been approved as set out by the case officer. Councillor Hislop, and then Jane.
Chair, maybe Mr. Sutty could clarify this for us. Now, it's not a condition, is it a directive they call it or something? Or a request that you can add to a permission that if any additional lighting was considered necessary at this, could we then ask them to use the sort of cowlings that direct the light away from other properties? Would that be acceptable?
I'll ask David at the end of the discussion because Councillor Maitland wants to come back. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that was really all that I was trying to achieve, that there would not be any change and add nuisance value to neighbours, because something very small like a light shining towards you is depressing and really, I think, causes nuisance and changes the amenity of a place. So all it was at this stage was that I was thinking that maybe that there should be a scheme of lighting submitted to and approved in writing by the council. So that's really all that I was going to suggest at this stage.
Okay, Mr. Sutty, what's your advice on Councillor Hislop's suggestion and the suggestion from Councillor Maitland?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, it's open to yourselves as a committee if you wish to attach that condition. You've heard my reservations about it, given that there wasn't on such a condition on the original parent permission, and it's got to be looked at. This is just an extension to the stable block, but I would have absolutely no problem about attaching a directive, as Councillor Hislop referred to, which is basically just giving advice. It's not enforceable, but it's making very clear that the view of the planning authority is that proper consideration should be given regarding artificial lighting and giving advice to make sure that it's cowled to prevent spillage above the horizontal, and it doesn't shine into any neighbouring residential properties. So there's no problem at all about adding a directive on if that's the will of the members.
Thanks for that. I'll ask Ivor and Andy if they're happy with that. I intend to bring this meeting or this particular item to a conclusion. I've got Councillor Drysdale and Councillor McKee, and then I'm going to bring it to a conclusion and we'll go to determination. Councillor Drysdale.
Thanks very much, Chair. I do actually concur with these recommendations for a directive in terms of, with regards to horse movement, it can often happen during the night at all sorts of different hours, which has to be the case. And a lot of the times horse stabling does use automatic downlighting, which goes off after a certain period, or full yard lighting, which can actually be quite intrusive if it doesn't automatically turn off. But I just want to make members aware that the directive probably couldn't include hours of operation because horses do get transported for racing, etc. during the nights. But yeah, I'd be happy to support that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. And there's an acceptance that we wouldn't have put any condition on the movement of horses simply because of animal welfare. So thanks for that. Councillor McKee.
No, thanks, Chair. I was in two minds whether to come in or no. I agree with Councillor Maitland. I think we've done it in other applications over the years where controlled lighting, well, we've got it with street lighting, where the spread of the light is limited. And I think that's it could be kept. The direction should be that it's kept within the site that we're looking for planning permission here for, and that it's a decent lighting. They can have it as bright as they like, but it's only in their site. I'd be happy to go with Councillor Maitland, though. Thanks.
Well, everybody seems to be saying the same thing, so I'm just going to bring this to a conclusion. Unless I get a motion, unless I get an amendment that varies what's being suggested, and Councillor Hislop, I'll just go back to Councillor Ferguson and make sure he's happy with that. That as well as the approval, we just simply add a directive. I didn't intend to bring Councillor Carruthers in, but I will as the last speaker, and then we're just going to this determination unless I get an amendment to the motion that's been set. And I hope it's something new, Councillor Carruthers, and no discussion about lighting.
Very brief, Chair. Thanks for letting me in. I'm really struggling to put a condition on something that's not been applied for.
Yeah, that's great, and we've no intention of doing that. It would appear just simply a directive which suggests what should be done. It gives the developer guidance, and if there are breaches, as Councillor Driver has said, we have officers or members of staff within our council that will deal with any issues that arise from out with the development area. So if members are all content, unless I hear differently, we're happy to go with the recommendation plus the addition of a directive, which is not a condition. It's simply a suggestion of how the lighting might be managed, and breaches will be dealt with in the usual fashion. Unless I see anything to the contrary, that will be the decision of this committee. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of this committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions as detailed in the report, with a directive to give advice regarding consideration of the artificial lighting to be directed away from neighbouring properties.
Thanks very much, and thanks for that, members. It was a healthy and helpful debate. Move on to agenda item number 5, which is an application for the erection of dwelling house and garage. Approval of matters specified in condition 2 and conditions: layout, design, external appearance and landscaping of planning permission principle 20/1138/PIP at Cherrybank Stables, Waterbeck, Lockerbie. The application types approval of matters specified in condition. The recommendation is to approve unconditionally. Reference number is 21/0735/ARC, and case officer again is Carla Livingston. Carla, will you take us through your presentation again, please? You're muted, Carla. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. The first slide indicates the position of the application site, and again the position of the existing access to the site of the B722 is indicated. As stated in my committee report, the principle of the erection of a dwelling house was approved at the local review body appeal earlier this year. Next slide, please. The block plan shows the footprint of the proposed dwelling house. The existing bridge over the Waterbeck is shown, and that provides access to the stables beyond just that are shown. You can see the circular horse walker and a rectangular building indicating the start of the stable buildings there. Next slide, please. The proposed elevations show a relatively modest single-storey dwelling house with traditional detailing. Next slide, please. This shows the proposed floor plans and layout of the living accommodation within the dwelling house. Next slide, please. shows the proposed section of the dwelling house. There'll be no accommodation within the attic space. Next slide, please. This shows the landscaping plan, which would be mostly laid to gravel. A hazel, holly and birch tree are indicated within the landscaping plan, as well as a planted rockery shrubbery area. Next slide, please. This is taken from the right of the application site, looking over the access road that serves the stable. Next slide, please. This is looking over the application site, which is currently a grass paddock. Next slide, please. Panning to the right over the application site. Next slide, please. This shows the proximity of the application site to the existing carpet gallop. Next slide, please. This is looking back towards the application site taken from the bridge over the Waterbeck. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carla. Members, you'll note that the roads issue have been dealt with in the previous application, so this is simply the dwelling this time. Questions for the case officer, members? It doesn't appear so. So we have, Councillor Dryborough, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's just coming back to the previous report on light pollution and things like that, just making sure that within the conditions that this has been attended to.
We'll check with Carla. Have there been light conditions attached? Are we doing a directive again?
If the committee sees fit, you could apply a directive to recommend that the light is from the dwelling houses. Any external lights from the dwelling house are cowled, if that's something that the committee sees fit to do so, yeah.
We'll come back to you on that at the very end, Carla. Thanks for that observation. We now have an objection from Middleby and Waterbeck Community Council. It's a statement again. Councillor Lever first. Mind any questions for the case officer just at the moment?
Thanks, Chair. I noticed one of the objections is to the size of the property. The plan officer says it's a relatively modest dwelling, but it's 295 square metres, which is over 3,000 square foot. I would think that's quite a large dwelling.
Carla?
There are comments that I noticed in the letters of objection. There was comments indicating that they considered that the house was overly large and that there's an existing office on the site, and that would have been an appropriate dwelling house. That was a recently constructed office on the site. I say relatively modest in terms of its overall scale. It's single story. The accommodation for the entirety of the accommodation is spread over one floor. And I think there needs to be an awareness of the fact that the accommodation is for the trainer on the site, who's a younger person and may potentially raise a family on the site. I think we have to consider the fact that people, regardless of where they work, may need more accommodation than a single bedroom. I think when I say modest, I mean in terms of the height, and given the scale of the site overall, it's relatively modest.
And this is obviously Carla's professional judgment. We've all got different views on what's modest and what's not. Councillor Maitland, please.
Thank you. If I could just ask, Chairman, it was interesting in paragraph 4.4. Sorry, I lost it and I knew I'd seen it somewhere. It's about talking about the proposed dwelling would be single story with a horizontal emphasis. typically associated with dwellings within the rural area. I'm sort of interested at that because I'm not absolutely sure that I completely concur. I think quite housing in the countryside is actually traditionally more vertically associated. Maybe you could help.
Carla?
When I talk about a horizontal emphasis, I'm talking about the quite often in rural, like farm workers' cottages and similar kind of workers' accommodation in the rural area, the dwelling houses are largely single story. And when I talk about horizontal emphasis, I mean rectangular, long and rectangular, with broken up by the windows which have a more vertical emphasis. Typically, I would associate a vertical emphasis with dwelling houses that you would more likely see in urban areas where you have terraces with narrow, higher dwelling houses. There's examples of that within the local development plan and the supplementary guidance predominantly of what we would consider to have a horizontal emphasis. David might help me with my explanation. I don't know if I can be, it's kind of hard to explain where I'm coming from there. Sorry.
David has obviously supported your decisions, so I'm sure he'll be able to help us, Carla. David?
Yeah, so I think Carla summed that up very nicely, actually. The sort of traditional Annandale cottages you'd find do have a sort of more linear horizontal emphasis in terms of the actual architecture, and are very commonly single story rather than the two-story you'd find in a more urban area. I think if maybe Councillor Maitland's talking about the vertical emphasis or horizontal emphasis of windows. Looking at the elevations, the majority are sort of fairly vertical emphasis. I don't know if Lara, can you go back to the slide which shows the elevations of the property, please? That one. Yep. So you've clearly there got on the top one, the east elevations, the vertical emphasis of the windows which are onto the lounge and the front door, and then I think that's a bedroom patio door. So I think that's all that's really being referred to there. But it's not an alien design for the area overall.
Thanks for that, David. We'll come back to this if need be. I have Councillor McComb, please. Still questions for the case officer, Jim?
Thank you, Chair. Carla, one of the representations complains that there is a lack of surveillance and the proposal does not overlook the stables and their entrance. But yet, on page 38, you are quite happy with the proposals in terms of surveillance and overlooking the facilities. Could you comment, please?
Thanks for your question, Councillor McComb. Yes, I can. As I said at the start of my presentation, the principle of the proposal was approved at the local review body, and that includes the location of the application site itself. Comments were made referring to horse racing standards, which say that the dwelling houses should directly overlook the stable buildings. And while I can understand that point of view from the horse racing standards, I'm looking at it from a planning perspective where the application site, the principle of the application, including the site of it, was approved at local review body. I respect that decision, and so therefore I'm looking at the design and landscape and etc. of the dwelling house itself. In terms of siting within that application site itself, it's not possible to move it within that application site, so it's directly overlooking the stables. That being said, the position of the dwelling house and the application site overlooks the main access road to and from the site, And I think in terms of, and it also overlooks the the paddocks and the carpet gallop, and it's the horse walker would be visible from the dwelling house. So in terms of surveillance, I think there would be sufficient in general. Also, it's within relatively close proximity to the stables, only being at like I imagine are approximately 100 metres away from the stables themselves.
Thank you, Carla. So you are quite happy in terms of surveillance and security?
Yeah.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the point Carla did make there was that the local review body determined the application site or area, and Carla has confirmed that no matter where on that site the house is built, it will not directly overlook the stables anyway, but it'll provide a significant level of security, and that was the intention when the application was made. If we don't have any other speakers or questions, sorry, for case officer, we'll move to Tracy reading the objection from the Middlebury and Waterbeck Community Council, and then we'll come to the agent, and then we'll go back to the discussion that Councillor Maitland raised. So, Tracy, if you can read the statement, please, and again, 3 minutes, and if it's beyond that, can you just maybe summarise for us just to bring your objection to a conclusion, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. The Community Council have been approached by a number of residents, i.e. the proposed new dwelling and detached garage under the planning reference 21/0735/ARC. Residents have expressed concerns that this new dwelling will be built on a greenfield site which is clearly out with the village boundary. The proposed site is a distance away from other houses and building groups within Waterbeck in an open field position, and as such will fundamentally change the environment and surrounding open landscape of the village. We are concerned that this proposal will set a precedent for development on greenfield sites which would be detrimental to the rural amenity of the village of Waterbeck. The proposed site of the new dwelling house and garage will be accessed via the access road from the main B722. The access road was built without the appropriate planning consent, which was obtained retrospectively. Reference 18/1203/full on 23rd of November 2018 at Planning Applications Committee. It should be noted that Dumfries and Galloway Roads Department have stated that there is still an outstanding issue as this access road was formalised without the appropriate permission. A retrospective road opening permit has not yet been obtained, which is required for works within the public boundary, and the access will require to be brought up to the appropriate standard. Community Council would like to raise concerns on behalf of a number of local residents of the number of retrospective planning applications at Cherrybank Stables, Waterbeck. These include planning application reference 18/1203 changes of agricultural building to equestrian use, change of use of agricultural land to form stand gallop, installation of mechanical horse walker, erection of stable block and erection of extension to existing building, formation of access onto B722 and internal road layout, plus a partially retrospective application 21/0628 full, erection of bridge, erection of enclosure over existing horse walker and groundworks to form carpet gallop. Community Council observed that if the due planning application process had been followed, then the necessary due diligence concerning each application could have been addressed at each point in time, as well as given statutory consultees and local residents a chance to consider any potential implications and issues from the planning applications. It could be argued that requirement of an on-site residential facility would have been apparent at the time of setting up the racing stable business, dating from the retrospective change of use application in 2018. This apparent circumvention of the planning system could lead to a reduced due diligence of the application or construction without the necessary building control warrant. Required inspection process could impact on safety for residents living in proximity of the development. Furthermore, we also note that this planning application follows on from planning in principle consent 20/1138 PIP, erection of dwelling house and garage, which was initially refused by Dumfries and Galloway Council Planning Department for the reasons that it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that a new dwelling house is essential at its location for the operational needs of the racing stables, and accordingly the proposal is contrary to the policy of the Council as stated in the LDP2, Policy H3, to national policy as set out in Scottish Planning Policy of June 2014, which permit the erection of new houses in the countryside only in special circumstances identified in development plans, and none of these cases apply. However, it was subsequently consented after a local review body reversed the delegation officer's decision on the 14th of March 2021. That's as far as I can get, Chair, on this one.
Okay, now summarise again, or is that it anyway, Tracy?
There's 3 kind of large paragraphs still to go, but the last paragraph I can read if you want.
The last one will be fine, just to give members a flavour.
Okay. We'd also like to raise concern about the transparency of the Galloway local review body, which overturned the delegated officer's decision. The report on the outcome of this LRB was redacted, and part of this meeting was closed to the public. I can only summarise that the requirement of the British Horse and Racing Authority licence for a 24/7 presence at the racing stables would have swayed the LRB's decision. This was known at the outset of the establishment of the racing stables prior to any construction retrospective planning applications. Then perhaps this dwelling would have been sited within immediate sight of the stable yard and not on open greenfield, which fundamentally changes the rural landscape of Waterbeck. Following on from this assumed reasoning for the change in the permitting of the development, the Community Council feel that the situation of the current proposal does not fully meet the ABHA licence requirements of line of sight.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And most of these objections or elements will be irrespective, because this is just my goodness, I've lost my thread. It's approval of matters specified in conditions, not an application per se, so we wouldn't have the opportunity to change that anyway. But that's fine. Thanks very much, Tracy. We now come to the last speaker of the day. It's Mr. John McCall again, agent. John, again, you've got 3 minutes. When you're ready, I'll remind you 30 seconds to go. And if you could remain with us in case members have any questions, I'd be grateful. Just whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. And again, the applicant and I are happy with the committee report, and we look forward to the recommendation being supported to enable the further investment to be made in this local and successful business. Having the applicant resident on the site is paramount in this case to enable the yard to be run successfully. And I'm pleased that the recommendation is to approve the reserve matters application on the basis that plan permission in principle was granted some time ago. That completes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions your members have.
Thanks very much, Mr. McCall. Would you or your agent be content with a directive just encouraging you to manage the lighting in such a way that it doesn't affect others?
I think that would be reasonable, yes. I don't imagine that the lighting connected to the house would be a problem, but in principle, yes, we would be happy with to provide lighting that would satisfy the neighbours.
Thanks very much. Members, any questions for Mr. McCall? Jane, are you content with Mr. McCall's response in relation to lighting, especially external lighting, and a directive?
Very satisfied, and I'm sure the applicant will be as helpful as possible.
Thank you. In the absence of any observations, then, members, we're happy to unanimously approve this application. Tracy, if you just confirm the decision of members today, please. Oh, Councillor Dryborough.
I thought we had to go into whatever it's called, because I lost my mind before we actually made the decisions here.
I thought we were in session, but when you go in session, then we're in session.
Yeah.
My apologies. I've got now Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Crothers after you, Councillor Dryborough.
It was just that you just finishing questioning Mr. McCall, and you never said we're in sessions. If you are in session, that's fine.
I'm in session, yes.
I do have a concern about approving this unconditionally. The situation is at the moment, obviously, the previous application is not in place yet, and as part of that condition, the road permit and opening was, as part of those conditions, had to be in place prior to that actually happening. So therefore, approving unconditionally, I could not support, but I could approve with a condition, as in the previous thing that the road opening should be in place prior to this. Now, if it's reasonable, it should be reasonable to consider that obviously the house is not required until the stables have grown, and I believe that is a reasonable condition to put in place for this. Chair.
Okay, I'll come back to Carla and Mr. Sutty at the end of our discussion, but I understood that the road condition having been addressed in agenda item 4 wasn't necessary in agenda item 5, but I'll come back to officers at the end of our discussion just to clarify matters. Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Chair. Just to support your comments earlier, I would move we approve as laid out within the report.
Thanks very much, Councillor Carruthers. That's helpful. So I'll wait just for a moment and see if there are any other members have any questions. Then I'll go to Carla first and then Mr. Sutty, just to give Councillor Dryborough the confidence that the outstanding roads issues will be addressed at an early date. Carla, can you help with the reason why there was no condition on agenda item 5 in relation to the roads when it was clearly set out in agenda item 4?
Yes, of course. The application for approval of matters specified in condition and the plan and permission in principle application, they effectively form two parts of the whole. So there were conditions relating to the access attached to the plan and permission in principle condition that need to be complied with, as well as the the two applications form a whole application, and there are conditions attached to the PIP, plan and permission in principle application relating to the road and access.
That's really helpful. I don't think David needs to add to that because we're simply approving matters specified in conditions, and one of the conditions would be the roads issue anyway. Is that right, Carla?
Yes, that's correct.
Good. David, you can come in if you want, and I've got Councillor McKee.
Yeah, it's really just to reiterate what's been said. I can confirm that the LRB decision had 12 conditions attached to it. So basically all the same conditions which you see on the previous application about the road are also attached to that. And as you'll see in paragraph 4.8 on page 39, the very last line is NB. The other conditions attached to 20/1138 BIP will automatically continue to apply to this approval. So that is covered.
Super duper. So Councillor McKee, you're the last speaker. Then we're going to, oh no, you've got Jane Maitland as well. Councillor McKee and Jane Maitland.
Thank you, Chair. It's all right having these conditions in place. It's ensuring that they're adhered to. That's my problem with them. Thank you.
Thanks, David. You've got an assurance from Mr. McCall that these conditions will be met. He even volunteered without any pressure that it would be done within 3 months, and we have an enforcement team that will ensure that these conditions will be met before the property can be occupied. And you've been given a reassurance by both Carla and Mr. Sutty that we require confirmation in writing that these conditions have been met, and then we will inspect before we approve the application as per the conditions set out. Jane Maitland, please.
Chairman, it's nothing more than to say that we've got a statutory consultee having made an objection. And I think it's important that as a planning committee that we note what they say when they do state that they are concerned about the systems that we have applied and the way we've gone about our business in the past. So I'm just saying that, you know, we've got to be absolutely transparent and clear so that people have confidence in the system. And we've had an example here where clearly a statutory consultee is suggesting that they are receiving representations that the system was not entirely transparent. That having said, the decision was made and we're dealing with the issue now, which I'm quite happy to agree. I think actually it's really quite a pleasant looking building. albeit I might have taken a different view about where it's actually going to be placed location-wise. But no, very happy to agree the recommendations with the directive as they stand now. But I hope, Chairman, you would agree with me that we should take statutory consultees' concerns very seriously.
I absolutely agree, Councillor Maitland. The unfortunate situation is much of the representation was about the location, etc., and that's already been authorised. We are simply dealing with matters that required us to agree, and matters, and what is it? I keep forgetting the phraseology. Matters specified in conditions, I believe. That's all we're dealing with today, whereas the statutory consultee's biggest issue was the fact that the approval was given, and they have raised issues about the LRB and how the LRB functions, and that's not for us to address today, although I trust that senior officers within the council listening to this debate will look at the processes and ensure that we have been duly followed, and that would include the taking account of statutory consultees when they do object. I absolutely agree with you. We shouldn't necessarily take instruction from them, but we have to take account of what they say. And I'm grateful to you for bringing that to members' attention. I'm sure that's duly noted, Councillor Maitland, amongst other members present today. So, Councillor Driver, I presume the advice you got from Mr. Sutty and from Carla satisfies you that the roads issue will indeed be dealt with as it's part of the planning improvement in principle and not necessarily the events taking place today.
I'm happy with the response that I got, Chair. You take the high road, I'll take the low road.
Thank you. And I'm sure, again, Mr. McCall will have noted, especially when Carla read out the significant numbers of retrospective applications that we've received, that we wouldn't be happy if that approach continued, and I hope the applicant is listening as well. That would be really helpful if they changed their approach, although I understand it's a new owner with a new approach, and that's particularly encouraging. So thank you for your presentation, Mr. McCall. Thank you for being here today. It would appear, members, if there's no alternative approval or no alternative proposal, that we will approve this condition with the addition of a directive. And again, Mr. McCall very helpfully has said he'd be happy with that, provided the directive is reasonable. So if that's the case, members, can Tracy, you can just confirm the decision of this committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members have agreed to approve the application unconditionally with a directive attached to advise the applicant on the external lighting to be coloured so that it does not affect any neighbouring properties.
Many thanks, Tracy, and thanks again, Mr. McCall. We move on, members, to agenda item number 6. An application for the erection of 90 dwelling houses, formation of access roads and associated works at land at Marchfields, H4 and 5 in Dumfries. The application type is full planning permission. The applicant's Story Homes, reference number 20/218/full. Recommendation is to approve subject to payment to the agreed developer contribution in respect of an off-site road improvement works and conditions. Mr. Sutty would like to make a statement just before we progress, members. David, are you with us again, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's really regarding paragraph 413 on page 48, and the recommendation is regarding the developer contribution for off-site roadworks, which has been levied as a sort of roof tax on all the other developments within the Marchfield scheme to date. So it's noted that the applicant has a desire to, and has offered indeed, to make this developer contribution up front without a Section 69 legal agreement, just to make sure that the costs and delays are minimised to them. We've taken further advice from legal services on this, and they're concerned that this isn't best practice and it may represent a risk to both parties. However, a Section 69 legal agreement is much quicker and less costly than a Section 75 planning obligation, which requires registration, and that is really what takes the time. So they've given some assurances that they'll be able to turn that round quickly. With your agreement, Chair, it might be useful to hear from legal services on that matter.
Okay, we have legal services here today with us. We have legal services. Can you just confirm, please, that you have discussed this with Mr. City, and this is the best approach for to secure the funds that this organisation have offered, and it be done quickly and reasonably in respect of the council's element of the work?
It's Laura Whiteley, boss.
Laura, I forgot Laura's first name. Thanks for that, and I see Vlad here as well. My apologies, Laura, it's an age thing.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've had the benefit of discussing this with Mr. Sutty, and it is the advice of legal services that there should be a legal agreement in place to secure any payment, and that this can be done through a Section 69 agreement, which can be turned around quickly and cost effectively. It would pose a risk to the council, both reputationally and also a risk with respect to governance if there was not such an agreement in place. And so I'm pleased that this has been now suggested.
Thanks very much, Laura. So I take it you'll be with us anyway, but just remain please in case members have any particular questions for you during the process. It's nice to see Henry McClelland has joined us. Thanks, Henry, for coming in at this late date. I know you've made a declaration of interest in 4 and 5. So good to see you. So if we can progress, then our case officer is Lindsay Cameron. Lindsay, if you're with us, please, can you take us through your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This application relates to an area of land within the Marchfield area of Dumfries. The location of the site can be seen in context in the smaller plan on the left-hand side of the slide, which shows the Marchfield area in general enclosed by A75 Dumfries bypass, Edinburgh Road to the north, and also Lockerbie Road to the south. These are the main roads shown in red. More locally, the site is bounded to the west by the properties in March Hill Drive, to the north by the recently completed dwellings in Phase H3, and to the east by the Lady Park Nature Reserve. Directly to the south of the site is the remainder of phases H4 and H5, which are now under construction. And Summer Park Road, which is the main arterial route through the development, runs through the middle of the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the application site in the context of both LDP2 and the Marchfield Area Development Framework. In terms of LDP2, an extract from the Dumfries Inset map is shown on the left-hand side of the slide. The site is located within the settlement boundary, but is no longer allocated for development. It's shown as white land. This is due to the existing and implemented permissions for residential development in this location, and more widely, and due to the inclusion of the site within the Marchfield Area Development Framework. On the right-hand side of the slide, there is the phasing plan from the Marchfield Area Development Framework. The application site is shown hatched in red as part of phases H4 and H5, with the rest of the phases, which are now largely complete, shown in yellow. Next slide, please. As noted in the report, the proposed development represents an amended site layout and range of house types to those previously approved. This slide shows the layout approved for phases H3, 4 and 5, with the current application site overlaid in red. As you'll see as we move on to the next slide, the proposed layout in respect of this part of the site is broadly similar to that which was previously approved. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed layout for the development. Comprises a range of detached and semi-detached dwellings which will be served by Summer Park Road and a hierarchy of streets. The area of public open space would be located in the northwestern part of the site and centred around the tree, which is covered by a tree preservation order, which is shown by the green star towards the left-hand side of the image. The SUDS area would be located in the north of the site with a swale and a public footpath which would run the length of the eastern boundary. The group of trees just out with the northeastern boundary of the site are covered by the same tree preservation order. Next slide, please. This is a proposed hard surfacing plan for the development, which more clearly shows the proposed hierarchy of streets, as well as the footpaths within the site. Summer Park Road is the main arterial route, and it runs in a roughly north-south direction through the middle of the site, with the rest of the development being served primarily by block paved shared surfaces, which are shown in the darker blue, the footpaths being shown in lighter blue and green. Next slide, please. These two drawings show the soft landscaping proposals for the site, including the planting proposed along the street frontages, as well as the area of amenity open space, the footpath and swale which run the length of the eastern boundary, the suds area and the embankment along the west of the site, which bounds the properties in March Hill Drive. Next slide, please. For this development, a range of 7 two-storey house types are proposed. These include both detached and semi-detached, with the semi-detached house type being the tweed in the bottom right of the slide. Variation will be provided through the use of materials, with only one option for each house type shown here, but an elevational treatment plan has also been submitted, which indicates the proposed external finishes for each plot. Next slide, please. Moving on to the photographs. I'm afraid there's not an awful lot to see at present. The site has previously been cleared and is largely void of notable features, and it's currently being used as a construction compound for the adjoining phase to the south. But this first photograph is a view south along Summer Park Road towards the application site. The recently completed houses in phase H3 can be seen to the right of the photograph, with the eastern part of the application site shown in the middle ground. The proposed suds area would be immediately opposite Summer Park Road, with the trees to the left marking the north boundary of the site. Next slide, please. Moving along Summer Park Road, this photo looks southwest across the western part of the application site. To the right of the slide, you can just see the existing dwellings on March Hill Drive, which sits at elevated level above the site, and also the only real feature of note in the application site, which is the tree covered by the tree preservation order, which is marked by the green star just to the right of centre. Next slide, please. Moving further south along Summer Park Road, this is the reverse view looking back in a northwesterly direction across the western part of the site. This photograph more clearly shows the existing dwellings in March Hill Drive and also the dwellings recently completed in H3. Next slide, please. And this final photograph just turns to look across the eastern part of the site with the trees in the middle of the photograph marking the eastern boundary of the site. Next slide. Thank you. And that completes my presentation.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Members, questions for the case officer? Councillor Ferguson, Andy.
Thanks very much, Chair. Lindsay, thanks for that presentation. When did the pictures get taken, the photographs get taken? Because I went round that road last night and they're under construction already in the 2 sites that were given plan permission or seeking changes today. So have they gone ahead before early on assumption, or is there, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but my reading is that they're changing some of the house styles, and that's like a variation, isn't it, from where the original planning permission? Am I right?
Lindsay?
Yes, the photographs were only taken a couple of weeks ago. The works that are being undertaken at the moment relate to the remainder of phases H4 and H5, which were granted planning permission in 2019. So this is a separate phase of development, which is again an amended site layout, but that was to an earlier permission granted in 2011.
Okay, so can I come back in, Jim, please? Yeah. So I was just wanting to get clarification, Lindsay. I wasn't raising a particular problem about it. So as you're travelling in Summer Park Road, roughly north-easterly, I think is probably the way, or up towards the north, heading up towards the older Marchfield development. Immediately on the left, in the dark area that's shown in the map on page 41, they're building houses there. They were there last night.
Lindsay?
So,
as far as I'm aware, construction at the moment relates solely to the remainder of phase H4 and H5, which has a previous grant of planning permission. I'm certainly not aware of any construction within the application site. It is being used as a site compound, but I'm not aware of any works having taken place. The applicant is well aware of the proposed conditions, which include suspensive conditions. So any works which are taking place would be potentially a breach of planning control and would be potentially being subject to enforcement.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. I've got Ivor Hislop, Jim McComb and John Young. Ivor, please.
Just to clarify Andy's point, if you look at the white land at the bottom below the black part on the map, the houses are actually being built in there just now, rather than in the two greyed out areas. My 2 points, there's mention here of pluvial flooding, and this site has suffered in the past from, they couldn't build on it because of the amount of water that was in there, and they had to go and redrain it. Now, I think in one of your photos, it clearly shows there's still a puddle there that's been there, and it's been a long dry spell we've had. So is there going to be an issue with the land round there about flooding? And the other question I have is on condition 6. It's the open space. There's amenity open space. Will that allow people to, use that space like a play park area? Because one of the big issues we have further along the road in the development at the Birchwood End, there's a play park there, and residents there say that there's litter everywhere. And do we have that in the management plan to actually clear the litter off that side by the developers? Thank you.
Lindsay?
Okay, in relation to flood risk, there was a flood risk assessment as well as a drainage strategy submitted with the application, and that has been assessed by both our flood risk management team and by our road service, and they are content with the findings and recommendations within those reports, and as such, we've got no issues with flood risk on that particular area. In relation to condition 6, the areas of open space are intended as amenity open space only in this particular case. There is no proposal for provision of a play area. The landscape management is to be undertaken by a private landscape management company, but that primarily relates to the maintenance of soft and hard landscaping within those areas.
Thanks, Lindsay. John Young, Jim McComb first, and then John Young, and then Jane Maitland. Jim McComb, please.
Thank you, Chair. Lindsay, did you say that all the trees on the eastern boundary of the site were to be retained?
Lindsay?
With the exception of a couple of damaged specimens, there was an arboricultural report submitted in support of the application, which clearly indicates those trees which are to be retained and those to be felled, which are very few in number. Most of the trees actually lie out with the application site boundary, so wouldn't be subject of works under this application.
Right, so some of the trees are being retained, yes?
The majority, yes. There's, I think, just 2 or 3 on that eastern boundary would be removed.
Thank you very much, Lindsay.
Thanks, Jim. John Young?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Lindsay. Could I ask a couple of things? First of all, is there? I note the provision of public footpaths. Is there any provision for cycleways in this scheme? And the second point, my usual one, are these properties going to be fitted with ducting to allow electric car charging in the properties?
Lindsay?
In terms of access through the development, it is primarily shared surface, so pedestrian, cycle and vehicular access would be shared. There is provision for the pedestrian footpath down the eastern boundary of the site. That also could be used for cycle use. It is indicated as a leisure path rather than specifically a footpath. But there is no dedicated cycleway.
And ducting for electric charging points if individual residents want to install them, Lindsay?
That would be something that would lie out with the planning side of things, because it's internal ducting. It wouldn't be something that we would cover as part of our assessment.
I thought we did. It was external ducting John Young was talking about from a gully, for want of a better word, from the footway up to the front of the property. But John will come back and tell you what it is you want, because I thought we did that. John Young,
Chair, if I can maybe clarify, that's something which maybe Lindsay wasn't aware of, but certainly Planning Application Committee has regularly asked for this on any large scheme which has come in. So I apologise, I missed that when reading Lindsay's report, that there obviously wouldn't have been a condition on that first time round, but the sort of condition which we require isn't the actual formation of the electric vehicle charging points as such, is to make sure that there is the ducting put in there for the capability of it. So I would have no problem about adding an extra condition in line with the ones that the committee have attached previously to this one as well.
We'll come to that at the very end, and John, just so your members feel about that. I've got Jane Maitland and then Jeff Lever, please.
Thank you very much. Could I possibly, Chairman, ask the planner about density? If you look at the detailed layout, these houses are very close together, and I don't know whether it's the whole areas, all the phases, which are as dense as this, but they really are cheek by jowl, and with no obvious sort of large tree planting in it to break it up. So I would ask about how we measure density in our policies, and whether this is at the top end of it. And the second question, Chairman, is about, could we possibly identify where the affordable housing is in this? I imagine it's scattered through. I think it will probably be the Tweed a house, but perhaps you could help me with that, please.
Lindsay, there's two good questions for you.
Certainly. In respect of density, it is similar to that which has been previously approved in the adjoining phases. Sort of policy on designing streets does enable higher density of development when that is mixed with placemaking and landscaping. There's probably not much more to say about the density, but I'd say it is similar to that in the adjoining phases, and is not dissimilar to modern housing developments elsewhere within Dumfries.
And affordable housing? Yep.
There is no affordable housing required within this development. There is the implemented planning permission dating back to 2011, where there was no requirement for affordable housing, and on the basis of that secured permission, which they could implement without recourse to ourselves, that it's not considered reasonable for us now to require developer contributions over and above those from the previous or original permission.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. Councillor Maitland also mentioned the the absence of trees or planting, does that change at all the density arrangement, or is that no a relevant factor?
In terms of the tree planting, no, there are not any large specimens other than the tree that is covered by the tree preservation order. Any new planting will obviously be relatively small specimens. These are located mainly along the street frontages and would require to be, let's say, smaller species in order to ensure visibility requirements and that they don't outgrow their locations.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. We've got Jeff Lever and then Pauline Drysdale. Jeff, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've received complaints from residents of earlier phases in this development about the time it's taken developers to bring the roads up to a satisfactory condition. So not only is that resulting in damage to cars, but it also makes it very difficult for residents to actually step down from the curb and cross the road because of the unfinished nature of the road surface. So is that covered by any of the conditions in terms of how long the developers have got to bring the roads up to suitable condition?
Lindsay, if it's not already a condition, can we place a condition? Maybe you'd help Jeff with that as well.
In relation to the roads, at present, Summer Park Road has the benefit of road construction consent, but has not been completed to an adoptable standard yet due to the continuing development within the site. The roads would require to be brought up to adoptable standards on completion of this phase, which is the final phase, which will join up the existing development to north and south. I'm just having a quick scan through the conditions to see if we have placed anything in terms of occupancy.
If it helps, Lindsay, condition 10A.
Yes, condition 10 requires that the dwellings aren't occupied unless and until they're served by a properly surfaced and adequately drained carriageway and footway. And then there's a number of other construction requirements there as well.
And that would be just at the completion of the construction before occupancy, Lindsay, aye?
Yes, that's right. As I say, this is the final phase in this particular area of Marchfield, and as I say, we complete development linking the north and south. So it would be the final stage requiring completion of the road.
Can I come back, Chair?
Yes, Jeff, aye.
So this wouldn't have applied to any of the earlier phases because, some of these have been outstanding for years, basically. The road's just been in the effectively a very rough carriageway.
Lindsay?
They would obviously be covered by other planning permissions, and any breach of those permissions would have to be investigated separately.
So, just to give Jeff comfort, are we, because we've discussed this before, when a development's completed, the developer should write to the planning authority telling them that they have completed all or met all the conditions that have been set, and then we would inspect that. So I take it we will expect that to happen, and we won't find ourselves in a position where the houses are built, occupied, and a couple of years later, Councillor Lever or somebody else is coming along saying, by the way, these roads are not finished yet. I take it there will be a requirement placed on the developer to confirm with us that all conditions have been met.
Chair, there's a number of issues you're covering there, which are not all interrelated. From a planning perspective, there is a requirement to give a notice of completion so that we know when the development is considered to be completed by the developer. That is not the same as them getting a completion certificate, completion certificate from building standards. which is another thing that they would need to get. And also, I think another very important one is how reasonable would it be for the planning authority to actually carry out any enforcement action against roads which are still being actively used as part of a construction method, so that there's no point in having the final top surface on there if you're getting HGVs going up and down for construction purposes. So the final bit in this is also the road's construction consent, where a road bond has to be paid, and that won't be repaid until the developer has actually completed things. So there's three things. Certainly from a planning perspective, we simply don't have the resource to go out and check every property that they say that they have completed the development, but a building standards completion certificate would have to go and check all those things. I hope that clears up the three sides that you're looking at here.
Okay, we'll come back to all that at the end, David, because I'm sure if members are still unhappy that they'll come back to that again. I have Pauline Drysdale, then Councillor Hislop, and hopefully we can go to the recommendations and what other conditions or requirements members might want to place. Pauline, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Lindsay, for the presentation. Just a quick question for either yourself or David, please. I think looking at the LDP2 on page 60, with regards to community services and facilities, we as a council do look towards more green spaces, and they're a vital asset for every community. And you can see that the policy document says that we seek to safeguard and enhance and support new facilities where appropriate. At what point in these big developments do we have the ability to have some level of control over things such as open spaces, cycle tracks, electrical ducting, space for bin storage going forward, which is really crucial with developments in Dumfries and Galloway as we've improved the waste management systems, walking areas, green spaces, and play and seated areas. The other question I'd like to ask is what sort of controls do we have over the pavement settings with regards to disabled access for people that will move into the area? So, you know, that's something I would just like to ask. But yeah, I'm just asking, going forward with new developments, what kind of control do we have with developers and developer contributions with regards to all of these important facets of new developments? Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. That's a good number of questions for Lindsay that cover planning policy as well as this particular development, but I'm sure Lindsay will help you.
Yes, I mean, this application is slightly different to a fresh application for a site which doesn't have a previous permission. Because this site has a previous permission which has been implemented and therefore secured, we are more limited in what we can reasonably request in terms of additional areas of open space or any other contributions, for example, affordable housing or education contributions, for example. In normal circumstances where you have a greenfield site, and this is the first time it's coming forward for planning permission, then we have requirements to provide areas of public open space, and they can take a number of forms. They can include play areas, amenity areas, green links, for example. So we assess each application on a case-by-case basis, but we do have adopted supplementary guidance in relation to provision of open space. In terms of disabled access, that is not something that we would consider under the planning application, but would come forward under building work applications and also in terms of road construction.
And storage for bins and ducting.
In terms of waste management provision, we also have a policy within the LDP about waste management provision. And yes, with the increasing number of bins that we have, it is important, and it's something we would consider under fresh planning applications for this nature of development. In terms of the ducting, I think David has already mentioned that earlier in our discussion, and it is something that we would look for being provided within any new development.
Thanks for that comprehensive reply, Lindsay. I've got Ivor Hislop, and then everybody will see a question from Archie that will come up on the confirmation of the determination by members. Ivor.
Thank you, Chair. It's going back to Councillor Lever's point. Is condition 10A enforceable and reasonable on the grounds that every other phasing of this development, the houses have been occupied prior to the roads having the final surfacing put on. Now, I noticed there's 6 or 7 of the current houses in, is it H4A or whatever it is, next down to the far end from where I stay. They've been sold already and people will most likely move in once they get in. Is that condition reasonable to ask that they are not occupied prior to the a properly surfaced? Now, when you say properly surfaced, do you mean top coat or do you just mean a asphalt top?
I think David, I'll get David to come back in. I think he said it wasn't reasonable before because there's other phases in construction traffic continuing to use that access route, but it would be expected on completion that already be brought up to the adoptable standard. But that, David, can you just confirm again what it was you said to members in relation to the road, what we can and can't do, and what enforcement we can and can't take?
Okay, certainly for this particular phase, as Lindsay outlined, I think it is reasonable because it's going to be one of the concluding phases of this development. It is a standard condition that we have. It is open to debate as to whether or not it is entirely reasonable or enforceable to put it on something of a larger scheme if this is at the very outset. By properly surfaced, I certainly wouldn't want to take any enforcement action against something that wasn't the final top coat, because that simply isn't reasonable to require that while construction is going on. But you would look to have at least something to a sub-base level that I think people could get in and out of their property in a reasonable manner without having to need a 4x4 to get in and out of their house, for example. If that condition isn't on, then there is absolutely no recourse that we would have, and the usual trigger is an actual occupancy. So because enforcement is discretionary and not mandatory, it does give us the option, if the condition's there, then you can give them a reasonable time period to actually complete it while you're aware that there are still issues with, for example, the buildings actually being completed and the road being finalised. But ultimately, if that condition isn't there and nothing has been done, then there would be issues with both road construction. For example, the bond could be called in to actually finalise the works, and we really need to have that planning condition there as an ultimate fallback. But yes, I do understand the points that Councillor Hislop is making.
Thanks, David. I'm going to come back to members on 3 items when we've finished our debate. Roads, ducting and section 69. There's a question for Councillor Dryburgh about section 69, but it might be better if we just wait until we're at the determination stage, although I'll leave that up to you, Councillor Dryburgh. And if you're content with that, I'll go into Councillor Lever, Councillor Carruthers, and then we'll go to the determination. And at that stage, we'll talk about the section 69.
I'm content with that, Chair, and I see Stephen wants to come in as well. I'll wait till that, you know, if he's got a question on that particular thing, and I'm sure we all don't need to be reminded of some of the issues of adopted roads.
Yeah, that's great. I was kind of hoping we had got to a stage where we're about to determine this now, but I've got 3 other speakers. I've got Jeff Lever, Ian Carruthers, Stephen Thompson, and then we'll get to a determination on what we might want to add to the recommendations if we're minded to approve. So Jeff Lever, please.
Well, it might be for the determination, but just to make the point, I mean, this has been very big site development in phases over quite a long period. And I think because the way it's been developed effectively from the outside in, the contractors could always claim, you know, they were still running lorries down the road, but it is a residential area, you know, once these are being completed, and it is causing a major problem for some people. As I say, it's not just the cars which are being damaged, it's a fact that you effectively have to jump down from the curb into the road, the temporary road. So it is something which we need to look at in more detail, I think. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get to that determination if it's within our control, Jeff.
Yes, that's right.
We'll come back to that definitely. Councillor Carruthers and then Stephen Thompson, then we'll go to the determination, please.
Thank you. Just to pitch in here, if you don't mind, in regards to 10A, I think it's appropriate. It is there. My own experience would tell me that the council, as roads authority, would enforce that in particular. I know they would insist, absolutely insist when I say that it was a base coat that is laid. But if that base coat before the wearing coat, and I'd like to think that the houses were occupied before the wearing coat would be applied beyond that for the sake of damage and such like to that wearing coat, because ultimately the council adopts that as there's a revenue consequence to the adoption of that to the council and its budget as it goes forward. So my experience would tell me that that's an absolute appropriate condition to have in there, but ultimately the roads authority would normally enforce this, and they would, with their own experience, would insist that the wearing coat isn't put on to the very last point for the sake of having somebody that really a really high quality finished product as people come in and occupy their dwellings. But the developers are absolutely responsible for any maintenance. I've been in sites where the manholes are sitting that high, covers that is, they've taken off bumpers, so they've been asked to remove them, put on plates, cover over the top to make it an easy ride. So if the base coat is deteriorated to such a level, it must be a tarmac Adam, not a sub base, an MOT type 1 type of material, then there should be the roads authority should enforce that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. We'll rehearse that when we get to the determination. Hopefully not too long. I've got Stephen Thompson, I see Councillor McKee as well. Then I am definitely going to go to the recommendations and see what members feel like. Stephen Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. It was just, it's a point on the developer contributions. Obviously in OP3, I think it is, we list a number of things, and one of the, so the waste issue, I think it's generally an indicative of over 50 units. We've got a certain criteria for education contributions, but the community facilities one, we actually, if we didn't mention it, it wouldn't be an issue, but we talk about health and community facilities, and I've yet to see a mechanism by which we have negotiated additional provision for health facilities, even though we sort of talk it, but we don't walk it. So, and I have raised this before in previous times, but it may not be particularly relevant to this application, but I think as in terms of how we do developer contributions, if we do get significant developments, then it's not clear how we could actually negotiate or attach a condition relating to health, because we seem to have no algebra or calculation for how that would be worked out. So I'm just wondering if David could maybe quickly assist with that. I appreciate you wanting to get on with the business, but is that something that we could get clarification on?
I'm really reluctant, Stephen, because we're in a plan application today. This is submitted in 2011. We read an explanation from Lindsay that we can't do developer contribution because it's so old, and we're starting to stray into a roads authority responsibility as well. I think there's a place for that discussion to be had, Stephen, but certainly not here today. Although I will ask David Sutty very briefly to explain to Stephen how we might get there and what the direction of travel might be, because it won't be at this plan application meeting today. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly for land releases which are of significant size, then you'd be looking for a master plan, and the master plan should identify areas within that. And this was done for Marchfield originally. You can identify a piece of land for community facilities, but the difficulty, and reserve it for that purpose, the difficulty is then making it happen, because, for example, a doctor's surgery is something which would have to be funded by the NHS. So all planning-wise could do is actually reserve a piece of land for that purpose, but it doesn't necessarily happen, or sometimes it takes time to happen. I used to live in a new development up north where there were shops and community facilities identified, and it took quite a few years before they all came into fruition. But all you can do is make the provision. That's part of a master plan.
And is that in our LDP2? Is that something we can influence, or should this discussion go elsewhere, David?
It's already part of LDP2. So I think the point Lindsay was making is that this is a current application, but obviously there's a secure permission from 2011, which you have to have, it's got significant weight, which you have to consider that. So you can't unreasonably put extra burdens on this one, because ultimately tomorrow Story could decide that they're just going to carry on implementing that 2011 permission. Don't know if there's anything else you need to be answer on that one.
No, it wasn't about that, because we already decided it's not about today. Stephen was wanting to know how we could do this in the future. And I was suggesting that it wouldn't be a committee like this, it would have to be somewhere else. And we need to tell Stephen where the somewhere else might be so that he can take that up at the appropriate juncture and the appropriate forum, because it's not here today, and that's the point I was making.
If you've got sites which are identified for large developments, they are already in LDP2 and they will already have a site allocation that requires a master plan and sets out what the provisions are, and policy OP3 also covers those.
Right, okay. Right, I've got David McKean and I see Andy Ferguson wanting to speak now, and then I am absolutely going to bring this to a conclusion. David McKean.
It's just a quickie. Councillor Crothers just touched on it about the height of manhole covers on these roads before they're surfaced properly. Is the developer responsible for any damage to cars? Because some of these manhole covers are sitting up some depth, and you could knock the sump off your engine, and that could cost you a lot of money.
Well,
so can the developer be held responsible?
Well, that'd be a civil matter, I would have thought, because the road's no ours until we adopt it, and the people are private owners, so I guess it'd be a civil matter. That be right, David? Civil matter?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Andy Ferguson, then we're away to trying to determine this today. Andy, please.
I think David actually almost answered mine, Jim. The horse is bolted as far as that development's concerned about other things, and if we take into account 20-minute communities that's being advocated right now, if you think that whole development is going to be the size of bigger than a big village, but smaller than a small town, there's no chemist in it, never mind a doctor. So, but it's for elsewhere, Jim. I think you're absolutely right, but we do need to discuss it.
Absolutely, and I'm delighted that members are clued up and seeing how we want our future to look, and I'm pleased, and hopefully we will progress these kind of discussions in another forum. Right, so we have this application before us, and there seems to be a general consensus we should be moving forward with this, but there are 3 issues that have been raised that we need to address before we get to an approval, if that's how we choose to go. So we'll address the 3 issues first, and then we'll see how members feel. The simple one is ducting. Are we happy to have that placed as a condition on this particular application? And it's simply a means of getting a cable from outside the property boundary up to the front or side or rear of the property. Ian Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't really got an issue with it. The only thing we did this at a previous application, which is not that far in the past. Loban Housing Association applied for one at Lochmaven, and so we talked about there, and something was applied at that point. But my only kind of sticking point, stroke frustration with this is under road construction consent, going back to what was spoken about previously in this particular report, there's a high level of detail of what goes in the ground infrastructure, so on and so forth. This is a planning application, and there's no detail in regards to, if we make a general point, I'm not saying we can't do it, maybe we can, we should, so therefore, but it's who picks up on that. Is it through the road construction consent permission, or where does that apply? I don't know if it sits comfortably here. Is it something that we should be putting in as a matter of fact in road construction consent?
I'll go and check with Lindsay, because it's obviously future-proofing the properties, because if we don't, somebody, as sure as a hair on a dog, they'll want an electric charging point in the future, and they'll have to start digging up their drives or their lawns or whatever, whereas if we future-proof the property, provided we can do that, because as I understand it, we can attach any reasonable condition to a property, and there's a kind of acceptance that it's now reasonable to assume that some folk will want charging points. But Lindsay, can you come in and help us, please? Can we put I'm not interested in whose responsibility it is, just simply whether or no we can condition it. I see John Young wanting to speak, but Lindsay, can you? I hope it's not just an argument with Ian Carruthers or no, because we're just looking to get this planning permission either rejected or approved today. Lindsay, or here's David?
I'll deal with it.
I'm not arguing against it, Chair. Sorry.
Lindsay wasn't party to the application. We have had that on a number, actually. Now, there was the Lochmaben one, Councillor Carruthers just referred to. There was ones in Stranraer, and I think the other affordable housing schemes we had recently also had a similar thing. So it would be exactly the same wording. It's not to require electrical cables to go to each property or anything like that. It's that simply within the house there has to be the provision made for the ducting internally made available so that it future-proofs the house. That's basically it. So I've no problem with attaching the same wording of the conditions that the committee has sought elsewhere.
Brilliant, thank you. John Young.
Sorry, Chair, I was just in process of typing. Thanks, David. No need for me to speak.
Brilliant. So if we're minded to approve, the ducting issue has been dealt with. The next one that seems to be the less contentious is a section 69. Councillor Driver, it's a question about that. Archie?
Yeah, it's just for a point of clarity, Chair. Obviously, within the recommended decision at the moment, there is no referral to a section 69 and 5.1 on page 48. I'm just wondering if the wording should be changed because of that, and I'm just looking for clarity on that, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, David would say at the start that he and legal had a discussion and come to a consensus of how best to approach this. But David, I'll be happy to have David come in and see whether or not the wording needs to be changed, or whether the developer, I'm sure, will, if not, will listening to this today, will certainly be taking note of the discussions that we've been having. David, you want to come back in, please, and tell us what the section 69 agreement might look like, and whether or not we want to place that as some text in the body of the report?
It's really just to vary the recommendation that's before you, because at the moment it just says 5.1 approves subject to A, payment of the agreed developer contribution in respect of the off-road improvement works, and B, the following conditions. So really, as a result of the discussions which we've had with legal services, the recommendation would have to change to approve subject to A, the completion of a section 69 legal agreement to secure the payment of the agreed developer contribution in respect of the off-site road improvement works. So it's really just adding those words in after A.
Brilliant. So that's something Tracy will deal with and confirm for us if we get to the stage of granting an approval. Ian Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you letting me in. Just on that particular point, so maybe David's answered it, but legal have obviously been involved here. I just, when I first heard it being discussed earlier, I thought, well, if somebody's willing to say, okay, we'll pay a backs transfer, so to speak, of whether it's £10,000 or £100,000, it's irrelevant really for us, but at the Cook level, a sum, we'll put it into the bank, then you'll get the permission after that. I wondered if that was the scenario, if that is the scenario, why would we go through a section 69 legal agreement process, Chair?
You maybe missed the discussion at the start, where Laura Whitelaw set out quite clearly it's in the best interest of the council, and there's no reflection on the developer or the offer he's made. It's simply to protect the council in its entirety. Laura, if you're still with us, can you just maybe make sure I've said the right thing, and you can confirm to Councillor Carruthers why it's important to ensure we have some formal type of agreement rather than informal, here's some money and on you go arrangement?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the benefit of having a legal agreement in place is that it's quite clear then why the money is being paid, in what circumstances it could be clawed back to the developer, put time limits on performance. Without that there's not a paper trail to show what the money is actually for, how it will be used, how it will be paid back. And it's good practice. It's also in our supplementary guidance on a number of occasions. A section 75 or a section 69 is referred to as being required before you take payment from a developer.
Very good. So
thanks, Chair. Thank you. That explains it thoroughly. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. Now we come to maybe the most contentious one. There are clearly issues about the roads. So I'll ask Lindsay again, or David, just to remind us all what we can and cannot do, what we can and cannot condition, what we can expect, and what we can look forward to having in the immediate future and when the development is completed. So I don't know whether Lindsay wants to come in with us or whether David wants to come in. I'm happy if either member of staff comes and explains to members where we are and what we should be doing.
Chair, from a planning perspective, I'm comfortable with the conditions which are recommended in your papers, which would cover the planning aspects of it. I think many of the issues I've heard today, as alluded to by Councillor Carruthers as well, actually really fall under the roads construction consent side of things rather than the planning application. But I think as far as the planning side of things can be controlled, you've got a suite of conditions there that would secure the planning interests.
Okay, so then if that's the case, can we as an authority write to colleagues formally and say this situation in Marchfield is a serious matter that needs addressing, and can you look at compliance, etc., on our behalf? I've got Ivor Hislop and then Ian Carruthers. Ivor first and then Ian, please. And remember, when we're engineers.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I was happy with the explanation Mr. Sutty gave, and if we could write to the relevant officers and ask it when the phases are finished, that the roads are in brought up to standard as soon as possible, that would be great.
Brilliant, Ivor, thanks very much. I've got Ian Carruthers. I think there's some other hand up, but I can't see who it is. So I've got Ian at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that's really good advice for David. And I have been on sites, Chair, where the council as roads authority has been at the point of enforcement action, and the bond was going to be used to finish off the work. So the council as roads authority, I'm more than happy to undertake that type of work, but it was local residents that brought that to the attention, and our roads officials did it that way in that particular case. But thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ian. That seems to be a sort of consensus. I've got Councillor Lever. Jeff, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think we are getting to a consensus. I mean, 10A, where it says it's been served by properly surfaced, I think properly is in the eye of the beholder. You know, if you're the developer, then it's probably a lower specification than if you're a resident. So, I mean, if we actually change that to, or add to that, finish to adoptable standards, rather than just leaving it as properly. Thank you.
I think from David Sutty's advice as we can, but I'll just ask him again, because we have sort of informally come to a conclusion that the conditions contained within the report are accurate, but we all recognise there's a real problem, and we're trying to encourage the roads officers to address this to satisfy the needs and demands of the residents. David, can you just come along and see if there's anything stronger we can put in our recommendations that you or Lindsay would be comfortable with, or do you say that that's as much as we can reasonably do given the situation that exists anyway and the 10-year-old permission?
Chair, I'm comfortable with the words as used from the planning perspective. I'm wary of, and certainly the advice of the Scottish Government in Circular 4 1998 is that you shouldn't be using planning conditions to actually cover things which are dealt with under other legislation. So from a planning perspective, I think if you're trying to tie it to roads construction consent, that doesn't sit comfortably with me, I'm afraid. They are two separate pieces of legislation. I don't know if Laura has any advice from a legal side of things on that.
Laura, if you're with us again, just a wee bit of advice, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would concur with David. There is legislation which takes care of bonds having to be put in place where you've got residential properties where there's going to be an adoptable road. There is another form of enforcement through the RCC, and I'm aware of work with roads that we do enforce, and we do call up the bonds and we do carry out this work. So I would agree with David.
Okay, in that case, we won't be adding any conditions on roads other than we would ask officers to write to roads and express our concerns and the concern raised by members of this committee in relation to the condition that residents have to suffer or experience when travelling out of the site, and ask them to intervene and ensure that what's happening is reasonable. We can instruct them. It would be a request, and I'm sure I don't need to tell David or Laura what to write. So on that basis, we have an change to section 69 inclusion, which will form part of the recommendation that Tracy will read out to us. There's an extra condition being placed on the ducting, and the roads issue has been addressed as much as we can. Given that that's where we are members content to approve this application subject to the changes, or are there any alternative views? I'll take the silence as consensus. So thanks for your contributions and deliberations. It's been really helpful. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of the committee, please, including the changes that we have agreed?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The members have agreed to approve the application subject to A, the completion of a Section 69 agreement to secure the payment of the agreed developer contribution in respect of the off-site road improvement works, and the conditions as detailed in the report, with an additional condition 18 for the provision of the internal ducting to be installed, which will be for the future provision of electrical charging. Okay, and although not a condition, we have an agreement, I take it, that David Sutty is happy to write to our colleagues in the Roads Authority expressing concern and setting out the issues raised by members, and the hope that something will be done to improve the circumstances for the residents in Marchfield. Is that right, David?
Yes, that's noted, Chair. Thank you.
I will add that as an action note, Chair.
Yeah, that's right, Tracy. I thank you for that. And Laura, you're content that happens?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to agenda item number 7. An application for erection of dwelling house at High Knock and Maze, Port Patrick, Stranraer. The application type supplying permission principle. The reference number is 20/2070/PIP. The recommendation is to approve subject conditions, and the case officer is Iona Brook. Iona, are you with us?
Hi, Chair. Sorry, I'm afraid Iona isn't today. She's got 3 young children who've had to self-isolate at home, so I'm standing in at the 11th hour. Okay. Just a very quick update on 2 things I've noticed going through the report again. Paragraph 1.1, the word plan is missing, which I think changes the context of it slightly. So it should read, represents a significant departure from the development plan, which officers are minded to approve. And noticing again that the standard condition number 6 has been used. That's just one that we have in our back office system, saying 2 cars, but I note roads are actually saying that they're looking for a minimum of 3 off-street spaces for a 4-bedroom dwelling. So on that basis, I would ask that members amend condition 6 to read 3 instead of 2 cars. But if we can just run through the slides, the first one just gives you a context of where the application site is in relation to Stranraer. You can see it's getting towards Port Patrick end. And the next slide zooms in a little bit further, just to show it's a relatively isolated steading. And the next one just gives an aerial view. And if you look carefully on that, you can see a sort of S shape in the sort of centre left of that slide. That's the foundations of the previous building that's on the site. So the next plan just gives you an indicative block plan, which takes that sort of S shape of the foundations of what was there and also which has been added to. The next slide just gives you a view looking west across the site. So you can see the existing buildings, the trees, and in the centre of the site are the buildings concerned. The next slide zooms in a little bit further on that, just to give you a little more context. The next one is just looking north across the site, so you can see the remains of the previous building and also some works that have been done. I'm going to use two sets of photos today. The first ones were taken by the case officer recently, so it's a little bit more overgrown. And so you can see there in the context, you've got quite a lot of grass has grown up around it. Next one, please. Yep. So you've got the building here. You can see it's not in a habitable condition, obviously. And next one. That's the second part of the site, which they are connected. And this is why I'm going to use the two different sets of photos, because these ones you can see just how overgrown the grass is. The next slide, please. That's showing the context again, where it's just looking down across the two buildings. Now, the next one is, you'll see it's taken in the winter. These were by the applicant. So these are all slightly darker, but I think it lets you see that wall that exists. The next slide again shows where you've got the wall that has been around, and you can see some brickwork. And the final slide just again shows where some works have gone on. And the next one should just be the final slide. Oh, sorry, that's the approved plans from 1990. At face value, this was a delegated refusal under policy H3 because there were no grounds for the erection of a new house in open countryside. There'd been no case made for an essential reason for the house to be there. However, the applicant was adamant that works had been undertaken to secure that 1990 permission, and therefore, once they were able to come back with a little bit more information on that, we concur that whilst it's not to the same strength of, say, a certificate of lawfulness, there is enough benefit of doubt that can be given to this to be a material consideration of such weight to overrule the normal policy H3, because this is going to be a house proposed on exactly the same footings, in exactly the same plan as you see on there. So on that basis, we're minded to recommend approval subject to the conditions, and that tweak to condition 6 to make it 3 cars, sorry. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, David. Any questions for the case officer? In the absence of questions, are we happy to go with the officer's recommendation subject to the amendment of condition 6? Councillor Dryborough?
Chair, I'd be happy to go with that, but however, I would disagree with David. I think the building is habitable, but usually by a troop of soldiers in that condition.
Very good. I've got Henry McClelland. Henry, please. I hope you're not one of the soldiers, Henry.
Tartan Army soldier, me, Jim. No, Jim, I really welcome the pragmatic approach that we're taking here, and fully support this.
Brilliant, thank you. If there are no alternative views, then I'll ask Tracy to confirm the decision of the committee. Unanimous decision, subject to amendment condition 6. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of the committee, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions as detailed in the report, with the amendment to condition 6, which should read no less than 3 cars to tie in with the roads comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, folks, that's been very productive today. Thank you very much for your involvement, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at the next planning application committee. Thanks very much, members. Bye-bye.